The first session we've got is about aligning to the CEO's agenda from the boardroom to the shop floor. And I'm very pleased to introduce to the stage Jonas Nordqvist from Orkla, together with Robert Bergstrom, who's the Managing Director of Accenture, and Carl Fredericks Zuerterwal, who's a consultant with Accenture. So if you'd like to welcome to the stage, please.
Good afternoon. Nice to see so many people here. We are pleased to be able to share our Anaplan story with you. This story is about a FMCG company known under the name as Orkla Confectionery and Snacks in Sweden. It's the company behind the Swedish tradition of fredagsmys, or cozy Friday, meeting your family after work at home on Friday. The other important part of this company is the Swedish tradition of fika, meaning drinking coffee, that you do all around the week, many times a day in Sweden. So that's the business. It's actually not that important. More importantly, this is a situation where we had a pretty radical change. I will give an introduction to this. After that, Robert will talk a little bit about the content, what we actually did, and Carl Fredrik will then do the demo. So I don't see the slide here, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, what we had, the situation behind Orkla at this time was that we had a radical change. We had a merger of two companies, this Fika company and this Cozy Friday company, actually coming together under the name of Orkla Confectionery and Snacks. So the merger of two companies. When you merge two companies, you know you have different cultures, you have different systems, you have all that kind of stuff behind, which was a thing that we needed to get hold of and actually get the numbers out. In addition to that, we had a need to improve the business potential. We had a downturn in the business. So a merger of the two companies at the same time, a downturn in the business, which we needed to correct as soon as possible. And then in a situation where we don't really have the numbers. So we needed to strengthen the performance management capabilities to be able to plan and execute properly. So in the end, what we then needed to do and what we needed to implement, we needed to start growing the top line profitably, at the same time reducing cost intelligently. Very easy if you don't have the numbers correctly. And the reason for not having that was, again, the two different systems. A very old M3 system on the one hand, and a little newer SAP system, not as chaotic, but not very good either on the other hand. So we didn't have KPIs, nor defined, or not defined and not communicated in the organization. So we needed to do that as well. We had as I said, a technology that was not optimized based on these two systems. We didn't really have the way of getting the numbers out. We had Excel hell, if you want to. How are we doing? Sort of, if you put the question a number of times, you would get an Excel spreadsheet with a number of different sheets within it, and you would be able to find something out yourself, but you didn't have it on at the palm of your hands, basically, which we needed to have in this kind of situation. So that was the background. I think it's not very uncommon that you have problems, but this was sort of many at a time, and trying to do the integration and trying to solve the business solution at the same time, we needed some really quick hands-on solutions. And that's when I called Robert and Accenture, because I had been working with Accenture a number of times before, using a framework which is called EPM, Enterprise Performance Management, which is pretty elaborate, pretty big. But Robert is an intelligent man. So I called him and asked him, is there anything we can do? Is there anything you can do to help me to get something of the things that I'm used to have and I used to see at earlier places? So Robert and Accenture came and said, we can do this. We can strengthen the operational planning and execution through a light version of Enterprise Performance Management. We can work many years with that to try to get everything through in processes in the organization. But we can do a light version of that. You would get a strategy execution tool, which you will see later on, an economic model, trying to capture all the drivers and try to get the way we actually creating the EVA, the economic value added in the business. So you get a model for that. You will get management reporting, which was the things I really needed at this point of time, because having something at your hands where you can get the answer to the question, how are we actually doing? And then in addition to that, you can also get a rolling forecast capability to be able to, for the key account managers to actually do a rolling forecast on your sales to then help the profitable top line growth. So, and I said, so based on my experience, okay, so what are we talking now? 3 years? Or 2 years? No, we do this in 12 weeks. And I said, I don't believe you, sorry, but I mean, having done enterprise performance management and I know the frameworks, I can understand a little bit on how much you can do in 12 weeks. Not very much, but you get something light out of it. But the rest, the system side, said, no way we can do anything like this. And Robert said, there's this new system, Anaplan, and I think we can actually get something out of this. I said, are you aware that we have 2 chaotic systems underneath and you need to pull something together? And we've tried this for a number of months now, and we don't really succeed in getting something good. Yeah, we know that, but we think actually can solve your problem. And then Anaplan came along and they did the demo, and I saw a little bit more, but actually I still didn't believe it. Anyway, we thought that sort of the best thing we can do is then try it out. And he promised me, and since we know each other for so long, I had to believe you. And you started, and now you're going to talk about what we actually created.
Yes, thank you very much. So one thing that was key here was actually to drive some simplification as well, which means that I wouldn't suggest to take the current heavy, complex, traditional, static budgeting process and try to develop that in Anaplan. It wouldn't make sense for them. Jonas and his leadership team had just defined and developed and defined a new strategy. So I said, why don't focus on that? To be honest, if you have a good strategy defined, isn't that the key what you should do in terms of managing and planning the business? In my mind, it is. The rest is pretty much tracking and controlling on the details, which someone else can do, and not kind of taking time and effort from leadership teams and managers at all levels. So that simplification was also key for the speed of this project. So let's talk a little bit about the approach before I go into the content. In order to drive that simplification, we had to run kind of an assessment phase, get the buy-in from the stakeholders on how they could work differently. So typically, what we do and what we did there was to run a capability diagnostic, coming up with the pain points, what are the other suggestions that we could, or alternative solutions that we could apply instead, but also to run shareholder value analysis and a metrics analysis and benchmarking analysis to justify the investment and the change and get the people in the organization to understand why should we change and start to work differently. Okay? Then we moved into pretty much design and development directly for those first 3 models in terms of strategy execution, economic model, and management reporting. And in parallel, we were working with the key stakeholders to align the new metrics. And once again, then we could use the metrics analysis. And then we ended up with deploying the rolling forecasting capability. And in total, we are now talking about roughly 15 weeks. Jonas said 12 weeks, and that's true for the implementation, but we spent a few weeks initially on the assessment part. Now, I want to focus here. We would like to focus on the strategy execution tool and economic modeling. The management reporting, kind of solution and rolling forecasting, that's not the new stuff. Even though those models are also quite interesting, but I would like to focus on the first 2. And the reason is, coming back to my point, why shouldn't you focus on executing your defined strategy? And the interesting thing here, taking a couple of data points from global research, of all companies around the world who have a good strategy defined, it's only between 10 and 15% who are able to execute. And that's not only coming from Accenture's research, it's also from other research as well. That's interesting. So, what are the challenges for companies to execute strategies? This is just kind of a selection. I usually talk about focus. For managers at all levels in an organization, if I'm a business unit manager, and if I need to commit to a very detailed annual budget, that doesn't mean that I can prioritize. It will be very difficult for me to prioritize and focus on things. So that's one thing. The other thing is the commitment. If I'm a business unit manager and I'm asked to commit to a very detailed plan, let's say in December, and in the same time show exactly how I'm going to meet those budget targets, the level of commitment from my side will be limited. That's how it is. We have seen this from research, from experience, and so on. Early warnings. When I then report, if I'm still a business unit manager, and I'm going to report the variances, the actuals versus budget, it's a very much an historical explanation. That doesn't create early warnings. If I want to execute my strategy, maybe we have given guidance to the market. It will be absolutely key for us to make sure that we will execute. And the early warnings will not be there. That's why I need to use forecasts, and we will show how to incorporate that into this. So, what we did here, we run through or developed kind of 5 components for this strategy execution tool, and also I will show how the economic model component comes in here. The first is around the value driver decomposition. If we have our strategy defined, we go through what will drive, let's say, the strategic imperatives as part of the definition. What will drive that on different levels, all the way down to operations? Then we apply metrics on those drivers. How will we measure those? And then we prioritize those metrics. And then suddenly you could have, let's say, a scorecard for the management team, and you can continue with applying target setting down on different management levels, ensuring that those 8, 10, whatever KPI targets are the right KPI targets to managing the business on. And then it's about, of course, then asking for the commitment, so ensuring a strong commitment for managers at all levels. And then the initiative forecast to predict future results. So I will show you how we incorporate that forecast. And then, of course, action plans. If we can have action plans tied to a commitment of achieving a certain target, we use the forecast versus target, and then we have an action plan connected to that. We will be more forward-looking, action-oriented, and that will create early warnings. Or we will have time to actually adjust and do whatever it takes in order to meet the targets. And then the last part is the economic model, for 2 reasons. First, I need to understand the investor's expectations. I will show you later on how we deal with that. And the second is to test. Let's say that we say, okay, we need to run this initiative now. What impact will that have all the way up to value creation and thereby a shareholder return? So it's kind of 2 different purposes with that economic model. So let's go through one by one quickly. The first, the value driver decomposition. And by the way, what you will see in here, the strategy, value drivers, metrics, all the numbers you will see in the demo, it's not the real data and the real content from Orkla, of course. We have done some adjustments. But what you can see here is the typical vision, a strategy or strategic imperatives, and the first level of a breakdown or the composition of value drivers. If we take the first one, which is about optimized product portfolio value, and the first level, volume, price, and cost are quite standard. But if we break those down, it starts to get more complicated or more sophisticated, if you can say so. And then you can take it even further down on the operational levels. And then, once, like I said, you apply the metrics to those drivers. You put the drivers and metrics into a matrix. And this is very important for ensuring a strong commitment from me, for instance, as a business unit manager. I need to feel that I have a strong level of manageability to reach my target, which means I can actually have an impact to reach the target. The sensitivity means if I reach my target, how much will that contribute to the overall performance for the company or for my business area and further up? Those two dimensions are extremely important to achieving strong commitment from managers or from managers at the entire organization. So, taking those metrics, and you will be able to come up with a dashboard with scorecards for each of those 4 strategic imperatives in this case. And here we have around 5 KPIs per strategic imperative. And what we did this for the leadership team, for Jonas as being the CEO, and for the leadership team to monitor their strategy execution. And like I said, they could then potentially continue to break those down for each of the functional director, and then further down in each of their functions to set targets that will be aligned to those metrics. But this is on the high level, you can say, leadership team. What you can see here, you see the forecast, you see the target. And this is now related to the strategy, which means we have no calendar year focus here. The target should be related to what we are aiming for. Let's say that we want to reduce our cost with 500 million, and we should reach that within 3 years. Then the time span here is 3 years, and not calendar year, because this is now the strategy execution tool. And the forecast then will then enable these early warnings, because you will ask for a prediction. Will we be able to meet the target if we continue to run our business as we're doing today? If not, status red, I will need to work with my action plan, come up with initiatives on how to close those gaps. The economic model, key here. So this starts from a total return to shareholders. It's dotted because that's not really a metric that you can use for managing an organization, because it reflects whatever the stock price is and so. But EVA, economic value added, is one example of a measure of value creation. And we know there's a correlation between a metric like EVA and total return to shareholders. So if you can have an economic model that with all the drivers that will drive EVA, and then you can use that model to analyze and simulate, then you have really, then you really have a strong tool. So in this case, like I said in the beginning, you use this for 2 reasons. First, when we did the shareholder value analysis in the assessment phase, we could actually we calculate the enterprise value, the current value. From the future value, you can actually investigate what are the expectations on growth in free cash flow. And that is something we can convert into more operational metrics. So for instance, down on EBIT margin, and down on costs, according to this model, with assumptions that we are going to grow on revenue on a certain level. Then we get the cost. That is then our target. It's actually from an external perspective. That's what the market expects from us. So that's how we can use that economic model for that reason. The other reason, like I said, if I do have a gap and I need to come up with initiatives on how to close the gap, how do I make sure that this initiative will actually meet what we have promised to the market? So I can model bottom up in the same way. So let's have a look into the demo. And Carl Fredrik will demo both the economic model and the strategy execution tool. The management, just to mention a couple of things on management reporting, that tool, if you can we switch?
Yeah, it's on.
So what you see there on the far right, management reporting and analysis. In here you have the P&L, the balance sheet, cash flow statement. You have sales reports. You can drill down to a very detailed, to actually a transaction level. You will see a number of dimensions. Typically, these very standard things that I guess all of you have when you're using a tool like Anaplan. You can do a lot of interesting stuff there. And coming back to Jonas' point, 2 ERP systems, directly feeding the data to this tool. The other forecasting tool is, coming back to what Jonas said, is for the key account managers to be able to forecast on categories and products and so on. It's a rolling forecasting model. So let's go into the economic model to demo that. And what you will see here is based on the slide I show you, but instead of a tree structure, you see here on a kind of a list structure, but you will still see the drivers for each of the metric here. So what you see in terms of columns, you see actual for 3 years, you see a forecast column, and you see the simulation column. And in this case, you see the key drivers for EVA, and if Carl-Fredrik would click on return on capital employed, you will actually see the breakdown, the drivers to return on capital employed or on all levels. So if we go back to EVA, and we see that at currently, we see that the forecast is saying minus 9.87 on EVA. That means that the company is actually destroying value for their shareholders. So what can we do then in order to get the EVA above zero, which means we need to start create value for the shareholders? And that is what Carl-Fredrik is now going to demo.
Yeah, thank you. As Robert said, we see the EVA is negative, and this is really something that we need to address. And we can use this economic model and the simulation input table to actually simulate different initiatives and how they impact the operational metrics. So for this demo, we assume that we've identified an initiative that will reduce our variable cost by 20 million. And to input that, we will use the table we see in the middle, and it has 4 columns. To the far left, we see the initial value, which is basically the forecast for each of these selected line items. We can choose a simulation method, which is choosing a completely new value, adding or subtracting, or having a percentage change. And then the column for actual simulation input, and the output in the 4th column there. So let's have a look and see what happens if we test this variable cost reduction initiative. So we say select the simulation method, plus minus, and enter 20 million. Voila. We see in the chart, which shows EVA, that it's all of a sudden it's turned positive. We also see that in the EVA is 13 positive, and our ROAS has improved by 1.5%. So connecting back to Robert, we're no longer destroying value for our shareholders if we would be able to get this initiative approved and decided and implemented. So the next step would then be to go into our strategy execution tool to actually put this initiative in there. So I return to the workspace and open the strategy execution tool.
Yeah, and what you see here is once again the high-level information in terms of the dashboard, a scorecard for each of the strategic imperative with prioritized KPIs that we talked about earlier. The forecast column, the target column, and status, and also a trend column. So if we would go into the strategic imperative,
it's supply chain excellence.
Yeah, supply chain excellence imperative. If we go into that imperative, what you will see here is the more details of what KPIs, the 5 or 6 KPIs that we had, and then a waterfall diagram, and then an action plan. So Carl-Fredrik will now walk through how this strategy execution actually works.
Yeah. Okay, so at the top we have an overall strategic initiative, and as Robert said, we have the strategic KPIs that have been identified for this strategic focus area. And this waterfall chart shows when I select the KPI from this scorecard, it shows the selected KPI. So we see the forecast, which is 56, and we see actions and a current difference to target and the target. Below this, is another table which shows these actions that we can see in the waterfall chart. And depending on which KPI I select, you can see it updates automatically. So let's select this cost saving. The idea here is, as Robert said before, that whenever there is a gap between the forecast and target, the focus area owner needs to come up with actions to close this gap. And now we just simulated an action or initiative that would turn the EVA positive. And this is a cost reduction of variable cost. And so we select the cost savings KPI, and we click on Manage Action Plans. And this leads us to a new dashboard where we can plan our actions in more detail. So let's add a new action, and we call this variable cost reduction. And we need to choose an action number, and this is just to reference so we can see it in the waterfall chart. So we select number 3. And this initiative will have a full effect in May next year. End of May. There we go. 100% performance. And we said 20 million, right? And here I can select the action status. And we can select from identified, defined, decided. And right now, it's not approved or decided, so it's we've just defined it. And then here below, we can see an action-facing table. And here is where we estimate how this KPI impact will ramp up. So we're currently in November, and but nothing will happen now in November. But let's say that we can reach 5% in December. We reach maybe 15 there, 40, 70, 90, and then 100. And we can continue. And here you can see in the chart, it translates these percentages and the KPI impact that I entered at 20 million to show the actual ramp up. And the same information is also shown in a table below, but in table form. And this is cumulative. But we can use this and see the actual impact or estimated impact per month. So now we've added our new action and we've done some planning on it. Let's return to the dashboard for the supply chain excellence strategic focus area. And if we now select our cost savings KPI, we will see an action number 3. So this action has been added to the waterfall chart, and we see that the difference to target is much smaller than before. Okay, so now let's say that this action is approved or decided. So we go to the action status and select decided, and all of a sudden it disappears. And the reason for this is that since we have approved one of these actions, it should be included in our next forecast. So the forecast right now, or before, was 56. It should now be 76. And we see the waterfall chart updating to reflect this new forecast. And that is actually the end of our demo.
Yeah, and just to emphasize a couple of things here, what we wanted to do together with Orkla was to make sure that they focus on their strategy execution or execution of their new defined strategy. And all these initiatives that we have been talking about now means that you will have a certain person being responsible for a certain initiative. So that person will be asked to update forecasts on a regular basis, not connected to the calendar year, connected to the lifespan of that initiative. And because that person will have that responsibility, because the target is already set, right, we will get the early warnings. And all of those initiatives will be consolidated up to this leadership dashboard. And if they would see that, yes, we still have gaps in terms of the predictions, they will have time to act in order to secure that we actually meet the shareholders' expectations or whatever we have communicated to the market in terms of guidelines. So that was those components. And any questions?
I can just comment as well, because you met the expectations and on actually getting the hands. What you didn't see now is all the management reporting and the data in here. And it was actually possible, which I didn't believe from the beginning, to put all this together within this very short period of time. Again, this is connected to two badly planned ERP systems, and it's live data, and it's actually working. And it's, in the end, when you look at it from above, it's not rocket science if you have infinite amount of times to actually produce it, but in this short period of time. And another thing which is then good, which was said earlier today from a CEO point of view, when you look at Anaplan, it's really great that you can have something started quickly. You get to see something very soon, which you can then continue to develop. So we can continue to develop this system and continue to work with it, which is really good.
Any questions? I hope there are a couple of questions. Yes?
Do you have a separate tool for your management reporting, or is it all done within Anaplan?
Yeah, exactly. So the management reporting and analysis was a third module, and the rolling forecasting was a fourth module. But we decided not to showcase the management reporting because it's more traditional, what we are used to see. But it was a P&L, balance sheet, cash flow, sales report. You could drill down to transaction levels, all the dimensions and hierarchies, and the regular stuff that we can see in good tools like Anaplan. So.
And management scorecards.
Management scorecard, exactly. Scorecards for target setting. So the same principle, forecast versus the target for each of the functional directors, but also a possibility to break down in each of the organization. But then it's a calendar year focus. And actually we have the two layers, you can say, of the scorecards. The calendar year scorecard, and then you just press a button that says LRP, which means the long-range planning. So for each of the functional director, they also could press that button, and then you see the 3-year scorecard and the 3-year committed targets.
And you have all this distributed through the tool, which is another thing here.
Exactly.
If you do something quickly and you do it in Excel, you have a problem distributing it throughout the management team or the organization. Here it's done in the system itself as well.
You indicated you had a mess of systems to put together and brought the two companies together. How did Anaplan, if at all, help you decide on how to deal with those systems going forward?
There's another point here, because we've decided to actually implement SAP was decided earlier throughout the organization. So we didn't also want to use Anaplan or invest in something really big until we knew sort of what's going to happen to the SAP implementation and all that. And Anaplan now, and that is done on a Nordic basis, not only for Sweden. Now we've implemented something that can actually be used in connection with the SAP, can take over parts of it maybe or whatever, but it's something, a low risk to actually help the situation short term and also long term if we want to. And if we don't want to do that, if SAP, the big SAP implementation in the systems below actually solves everything, then we can just sort of stop using Anaplan. I think it's unlikely, but it's like, you have that option if
because you haven't done the upfront investments as you will need to do with the regular systems, right? Only the consulting fees to Accenture. But I promised Jonas that everything will be documented such in a detail, so you should be able to convert it into another tool. Yeah, with some password. Yeah. Right.
Hi, I've got a question in terms of, and it may be early days yet, because it looks like you've recently implemented this, but in terms of tracking actual performance against those objectives, everyone's saying, yes, I've done this, but when you then look at the finances, sometimes the numbers don't add up. Is that a challenge for you?
You have to trust that the organization actually forecasts the right way. In the end, you will see it quicker here because you have the numbers together. Yeah. Earlier, you have two different systems and Excel, you didn't really see that. So, at least maybe you haven't solved it, but it's much easier to track with this kind of solution.
But it's also coming back to the initial step where we did the assessment and discussed the conceptual kind of solution, because this model means that key account managers or initiative owners for these strategic imperatives will need to provide their forecast according to a new definition of what a forecast is. It's a true belief, best guess based on the current assumption base, and it shouldn't be impacted or influenced by what we have said in our target, because then the model will fail. So this is a huge change in terms of culture and mindset as well, that we work with the organization to get them to, and to get the transparency of, we have our forecast, we have our target. And in my mind, when I work with clients and we do this for the regular calendar year stuff, I'm always challenging the client if there is not a gap early in the year. Because if I'm a business unit manager and I have to commit to a KPI target, which I'm supposed to reach by the end of December next year, I have 1 year to reach my target. If I don't have a gap in January, I'm questioning. Either the target is not stretched enough, or you're lying in the forecast. Of course, there should be a gap early in the year. That's how, what we have seen, based on my experience working with a number of companies over the years, that what happens is that you will have managers in the entire organization to make a stronger commitment versus in the past to even more stretched targets. Because what we are talking about here is a complete different way of applying EPM. This is not accounting, this is more value-based management. While for a lot of companies, EPM is equal accounting, which is not. When you do this value-driven decomposition and KPI prioritization correctly, we know from analysis that, let's say, 15, 20 KPIs will explain 80% of the performance. So then I ask, why do you spend so much time dealing with all the details, trying to explain the remaining 20% of the performance, when you can't aim for 100% accuracy anyway, because of the increased volatility and complexity in the market? If you're 80, 90% correct, that's good enough for managing. But then, like I said in the beginning, then you need to have the tracking and controlling capability in the background on all details. But that shouldn't take time for leadership. There should be an alert if the travel cost is out of threshold into the leadership team. But for sure, that has then already been indicated, because there will be an SG&A target in the scorecard, ideally a relative target, that will indicate that we, from our forecast to target, we see that there is a gap. But just from a controlling purpose, there will be an alert coming from the, you can say, the back office, which who are monitoring all the details. Yes?
Jonas, how much do you use the dashboard yourself? Do it, how easy do you find it?
I mean, this is very easy to use. I mean, it's intuitive, as we said, so it's really, I mean, this is where you can actually get the data out. And instead of emailing the different figures or spreadsheets, this is really intuitive to go in and look into. And apart from that, it's easy also to create new stuff or create new reports, which basically anyone can learn that can handle Excel pretty well. So, which means it's not very difficult finding people in the organization that can actually start developing things in Anaplan.
We actually decided together that to deploy the management reporting and analysis model through an email, as you know, Anaplan works, with an attached manual to Jonas' leadership team. And 2 days later, I met the sales director in the corridor, and I asked him, have you logged in? Yeah, I'm using it heavily. No training. It's just amazing. Mm-hmm. That is not what I'm used to in the past, if I can say so. Yeah.
I'm running the strategy for Verizon in India. So I've done.
Hi, my name is Arvind. I drive the strategy for EMEA for Verizon. I've done these kind of stuff in Excel in the past, and I just want to understand from Anaplan's point of view, how do you manage the governance in terms of, how do you make sure that someone down the line doesn't just change the numbers? How do we keep track of how this is being measured, and so that only one person is able to manage the Anaplan?
So what you can see, you can't see it on this page, but what you could see if you back to the first.
But you can just explain about the user rights and the
exactly.
sort of.
Yeah,
I mean, but first of all, you saw the first screen with the scorecards. You could actually also see the strategic imperatives. And the supply chain excellence, of course, that will be owned by one of the director in the leadership team, ideally the supply chain director, right? So,
No, but I think
and
the
then you
quest-
go down, you still have the roles and responsibilities for the different areas.
I think
And
because
then
I think
user-
the question is more on the technical side, right? How,
No, I think the question is pretty much, let's say finance is driving this strategic
okay.
strategy and the gaps and stuff like that, and you're given the target to the supply chain person, and the supply chain person just changes without you being aware.
So for me, enterprise performance management is about the wider enterprise. It's not a finance thing, only a finance thing. So we worked with the entire leadership team, with the supply chain director, marketing, sales, etc., equal to how we work with the CFO. Because this is an enterprise, this is a tool or capability for managing the enterprise. So we would expect that the supply chain director will also go in and make sure that her direct report and initiative owners to the initiatives connected to her strategic imperative will actually provide a forecast.
So whenever
Of course,
it is,
supported from finance, right?
so whenever it is updated, it automatically consolidates into one
Yeah.
standard template.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. I don't know about you, I found that really interesting and a really innovative use of Anaplan. So I'd like to say thank you to Jonas, to Robert, and to Carl. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.